It's 7:30, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got not quite as long an agenda as usual, but we've got a lot on there, so I think we'll go ahead and get going. We'll dispense with introductions. I think most will introduce themselves as we go through some of the items. So we'll jump ahead to item number 2, approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Any comments on the minutes? Councilman Spencer.
Yeah, I just would like to make a change. I believe when Mr. Smith was talking about the parking study, I had asked for members of this committee to participate in that debrief. So I would just like that reflected in the minutes, please.
All right. You have enough that you can redraft those? Okay. All right, you have the minutes before you with one suggested change. Any other suggestions, recommendations?
I would move to approve the amendments with that amendment.
Thank you, sir. We got a
Second.
motion to approve with the change. Got a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. We've got a couple guests with us, and they've got other things. We kind of moved this item in very quickly, so we're going to move the agenda around so that we can honor their time. There's been discussions on both east side of town and west side of town on some potential opportunities. I know some or all around this table have been involved in one or the other, maybe both of them. So we thought it was important to bring this committee not really up to speed, just kind of announce what some of the opportunities are and then see where we may potentially want to go from here. My preference would be that we not act on it today. You know, it's going to be a lot of information and there's still a lot of details, but that you take the information from today and really consider it, and we'll see if we're ready at the next meeting to put it on for continued discussion and maybe action. But my preference would be that we not move forward today. There's just too much here, and I think we need to digest it. But Eric Landwehr is here from the county. And Eric, I think, has got a presentation, and Commissioner Otto is here. So between the two of them, we will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks for having me today, and thanks for bumping me up on the schedule a little bit. Harry Otto, Western District Commissioner, is here as well. That's been involved in these discussions, and so has Commissioner Jeff Helsher, Eastern District. So they're well aware of where we're at on these ideas and support going forward and having this conversation with City Council and Mayor going forward and make some decisions for long-term expansion in the city. So I want to talk to you all today about Wildwood Drive Extension and Militia Drive Extension. So these two projects, they have been around for a while. I was a young county engineer when we first started talking about them. I started at the county in 2005. Wildwood Drive started in 2007. So very early in my career. And it just didn't pop out of nowhere. It was identified in the 2003 countywide thoroughfare study. It was a consulted study done to look at improvements to be made within the county. It looked at improving existing facilities, intersection improvements, expansion improvements on existing roadways. It also looked at expansion of roads, new roads out into areas, undeveloped areas for growth, for traffic growth, and just general development growth. So that was done in 2003. Out of that, the county decided to begin work on the Wildwood Drive extension in 2007 and went through the process, had plans designed, was planning on building it in 2011, but that got put on the shelf due to, at that time, St. Mary's had announced that they were going to build a new hospital in the 179 corridor, and then they pulled back, and then they announced again, and it was kind of in that time frame as there was a lot of back and forth on whether they were going to do that or not. And Wildwood Drive is kind of a component to that whole development of that area, and so at the time the county commission decided to put it on the shelf, look at it at a later date when the need was there, and it was a little economic uncertainty at the time, and so it was put on the shelf. We did acquire the right-of-way, had it pretty much ready to go in 2010, but again, it was put on the shelf. And then about 2012, I think, I can't tell you for sure how it came up or how it became this, but it became a city-county cooperative project idea around 2012 and had been talked about, not just county doing it, but city partnering with it through city-county cooperative project funds. And if you look at, and I'll get to the drawing here in a little bit, if you look at it, it sets up well for a connection from St. Mary's through a Mission Drive extension to the west. Here's the study done in 2003, and if you look, that's a pointer, yeah. Part of that study, it has regional street system improvements, list out several, and those are shown in pink on the drawing. And several of these, this one here, that's a extension up to the north to capture that area, Scott Station Road. But really, we're looking at this area here, and if you look at that, this would be the hospital area, new school, and so really all of this has been completed. This road would be Coles and Stonebridge Parkway, I think is the name of it. Some of that's done. So there's been some of these improvements made. Christie Drive down here by the new Special Olympics Center, that's been done. And so really we're talking about Wildwood Drive extension from where it intersects at Edgewood up to Rock Ridge Road near Frog Hollow, and then that would connect over to the interchange at the hospital through a Mission Drive extension to the west. This drawing was done in 2011 or 12, and it was done as part of a public meeting held for the interchange. When that was being designed, MoDOT goes and presents it in the form of a public hearing to the citizens, and this drawing was included with that as what some things would look like after that interchange is built and the hospital's built. And in the kind of the teal blue, the teal blue is the design of Wildwood Extension to the south. Little aerial view of that. This drawing here is a little outdated. There's actually a roundabout at this intersection where Frog Hollow and Rock Ridge intersect. But it goes down through the valley, connects to Edgewood here. This other colored yellow line, that is the city limit line. When we designed it, this property right here was not in the city, but they have since annexed in. And we've been having discussions with the property owners, at least two affected here, even going back further when we were designing it. Other properties had expressed interest in developing at some point, but more recently, this one especially, and even some discussions with this one to the south. These folks are on board. One proposal on this property would be several residential units, single and multifamily. And the northern property, actually, right here, part of what we're doing to build the road is we have to get a lot of fill to do that, and we were going to blast and create a building site pad, basically get the rock we need to build the road, and that would end up with a level pad for future development there on that property. So a lot of potential development with this, and it will have a utility corridor. When we were doing the design work, there's a water tower here, District 2, and they had expressed interest of running a main down and connecting to Edgewood when we do that project. Like I said, we do have plans done. They were pretty close to being ready to bid. So we do have that, and a typical section would be a 3-lane with curb and gutter, like what you see in town on a lot of roads. They'll have sidewalk on both sides. In 2020, we just decided to update the estimate just to kind of see where we're at, and it originally was around $3 million, and it bumped up to $4 million. We're assuming it's going to be about $5 million today, just with inflation and just with the construction climate right now. There's a lot of work out there in the state, and not many contractors do the work, and so we're seeing increases in cost due to that. One thing about the plans, they were done so long ago that the engineering software to do that is no longer in use and no longer available. And so because of that, we would have to redesign the project, not really redesign it, but we'd have to redraw and recreate the plans, and that would cost approximately $60,000 to $75,000. I think that's a little on the high side, but there will be a cost to get that ready to bid. It's not just pull it off the shelf, dust it off, and put it out for bid. It will take a little work to do that. if the decision was made to move forward, we could be ready for construction in 2024 is what we're thinking right now. Possible funding scenario, and this is just for discussion purposes. It's not my idea of how it has to be done, not city or county. This is just some ideas to think about, just to start the conversation to see how this could be funded. So if you look at a total cost of $5 million, if you were to put city-county cooperative funds in, assume about $3 million there. The county does have some funding for major thoroughfare projects. We had identified Scott Station Road as a possibility for that. If we were to delay construction on that project into the next sales tax cycle, just do the design work, it could free up about $1.1 million for this project. And we also have a safety improvement funding category, and with Rock Ridge being a pretty high volume roadway, and when we build the intersection roundabout with this new roadway to Rock Ridge, we could utilize some safety improvement funds for that. And then some additional funds, either a grant or maybe through some developer contributions, could make up the difference. Let's talk about Militia Drive. So these projects, Wildwood and Militia, are very similar in what they look like, how they connect, just even the actual design of them. They look a lot alike. And they all kind of really started about the same time. Now, Militia Drive, we never started any design work. It was just ideas on paper. We began looking at this in 2006. Actually, when that sales tax cycle, I don't know the exact one, but the one from 2007 to 12, I actually put together an estimate for this project in 2006. So it's been on the discussion table for quite a while, but nothing really materialized. Militia Drive interchange, we've always kind of thought that this could be, if you were going to take 179 and connect it over through the east to get it to the east side of town, you could intersect it at Militia Drive. And so by building this extension, it kind of sets up a possibility for connecting. Or it could be connected to Route M to kind of capture some of that traffic coming from Wardsville to Taos. There's quite a bit of growth in that area. Could be a good connection to Route M. And more recently, we've had some conversations about maybe revving this project up and getting it going, at least getting the discussion going, and talk to all the property owners affected by it, and they're on board and have ideas, some possible development, or some just let's see it happen, and we'll work from there. In 2017, MoDOT did a project to construct safety improvements at Shamrock Road. And when they did that, they cut out that at-grade intersection for traffic heading north or heading west into town, heading north on Shamrock and west into town. So now they have to make a U-turn, head down to the Militia Drive interchange to make a U-turn. This is that project. It offset the intersection and did a lot of work, and it's a lot better safety-wise, but it does require that traffic to go down to the interchange, make a loop, and go back into town. When looking at, possible connections over to Highway 179, does that make sense? Yes and no. It would be good. It would expand a lot of area. However, it goes through the river bottom almost the entire way, and it does have to cross the Moore River at least 4 times, maybe even 5, depending on where you go, which kind of lends itself to maybe a further out loop, or maybe the loop is a Route B to M and on over, and maybe that's just kind of the loop as growth happens. So we're looking at this as a possible, could be connected over to 179, or maybe it just connects over to M. But either way, we do this project, could facilitate either way that it goes. The pink line goes a little to the east, and then the yellow line goes a little to the south. But either way you do it, it can connect one way or the other as it goes. Looking a little more closer into it, there's 4 quadrants we're identifying. The city limit, again, is that yellow line there. This is the city in the city limit of Taos, and then this quadrant would be unincorporated Cole County. Our preferred location would take it directly south and then turn a little bit up this draw through the unincorporated part of the county to Liberty Road. And as we've been talking to property owners, one idea that kind of floats out, I got it on the next slide, is that this quadrant here, there's been some discussion about a possible truck plaza or some other retail that would kind of pair well with our multimodal transload rail facility that we're getting ready to build. It also pairs well with Ike Skelton Training Center and all the industrial area that's there. And then on the other side of the highway, you have area for additional industrial growth. So it fits well with that. There's just never really been any momentum to get anything going, primarily because there was no access to that property. Sewer extension would have to happen underneath the highway. That's been discussed along with this, but that would be a component that would need to be figured out. Again, looking at possible funding scenarios, kind of the same idea on the other one. This project, we're estimating about $3 million. City county cooperative funds, if we put 1.5 million in, the same amount of the thoroughfare funds through the county, 1.1 million, and then grant and/or developer funds make up the difference. So putting all these together and how that fits into city county cooperative projects over this current 5-year period, we're about 9 months into the 5-year period. Total funding is 11 million, and I know High Street Viaduct has been kind of set aside as a primary project in this cycle. 5 million has I've been kind of set aside for that, but the city I know is getting close to beginning the design work at about 500,000. We also have verbally committed to the multimodal transload facility, putting in about 800,000 on that. Take these two projects, add that to it, you get pretty close to 11 million. Monroe Street improvements and also Stadium Boulevard and Edgewood Drive corridor improvements have been also discussed. It's utilizing some of these funds. So there would need to be some decision on how are we going to fund this going forward. But now's the time to have that conversation. And, sometimes we get into, I know I have in the county, sometimes we get into painting ourselves into a box. Well, we can only use these funds for this type of work. We're trying to look at utilizing grant funds. I know ARPA funds are out there, and so we're trying to think outside the box more recently on how to fund some of these projects that we want to do to make long-term improvements in the county. So that would be one thing to think. We obviously don't have the money to do everything that's on this list, but if we can look at ways to find other funding, maybe we can accomplish that. So that's all I have. Entertain any questions or comments. I know Councilman Fitzwater suggested that the committee think on this over the next month, bring it back next month possibly for a decision to move forward with the concept. But yeah, I'd entertain any questions or whatever you got. Be happy to answer and talk about. So.
Okay, and we'll do that. Before we do, I know Mr. Marash and Mr. Bangy have been involved in some of these discussions. Do you have any preliminary comments, or would you rather go to questions first? I know one thing we also talked about was apparently there's a very popular bike route up at Rock Hill. So maybe an opportunity, if the Greenway wanted to extend up, we could do it at that time. So there might be some opportunities to expand that if there's interest.
Right, yeah. That going through that valley, it would be a nice extension for a Greenway trail. Yep.
Okay, with that, questions, comments? Councilman Spencer.
I'd just like to say again, thanks for the presentation. It's really nice to have a good working partnership with our counterparts in the county, and always willing to have good in-depth discussions and talking about how we can grow together. And sometimes other communities don't have that kind of relationship. So thank you all very much for working hard and bringing this proposal to us. Thank you.
You must have done a great job.
Or you give too many people too many facts, it bombards them, and then, yeah. So, no, it's all
Commissioner,
good.
did you have any comments? I know you've been very active on the West Side project.
I would just add, it's really time when you got maybe a dozen or close to 24 years of something being floating around. It's either time to move forward with it or to bury it. And once we've told the voters, I think, several 5-year programs, I don't know when it started. It didn't start with A, and we're up to I. or where are we now? I. At some point, we're going to have gone through the alphabet and not taken this thing either to completion or to determine to its end. So I think it's time to, and you know, it fits well. We've got something east and west here. We're not playing favorites with one side of the county and one side of the city versus the other. We can benefit both sides. So.
Okay. And Mr. Landwehr put the proposed projects for city county, so you remember a couple of our identified projects were Monroe Street and the stadium corridor. So as he indicated, I mean, we're going to have to negotiate on, you know, what are the priority projects. We have put some dollars in to begin the design process for the viaduct. So, I mean, there may be some opportunities there, but there were other identified projects. So that's why, you know, I felt lay as much information on the table and then cogitate on it, and, you know, we'll come back. And I know the county's still going to have to go through the same process. So make one last, any Councilman Shriver?
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about the one that would be out toward Militia Drive and Liberty Road. But on your preferred route there, Eric, that you showed the preferred route, does that still require numerous crossings of the Morrill River? Of course, we know how the Morrill River twists and turns, but
Again, it's gone. Even at Militia Drive, you would still have to cross the Morrill, I think,
Yeah.
at least 4 times.
four
So,
times.
I mean, realistically, this is several years off,
Yeah.
if at all. Probably the way we've kind of looked at it more logically, it's probably going to connect over to Route M.
Yeah.
That would make more sense.
Yeah, well,
I don't believe so. Maybe
Yeah.
just creek crossings.
and we know how expensive bridges are, so.
Yes, very.
Yeah, I think they're good projects, and I appreciate all the work that you put into it, so
Sure.
thank
You're
you all
welcome.
very much.
While
Thank
you're
you.
there, could you just update us on the multimodal real quick? I know we had to
Yeah.
do a little bit of code work there to keep
So-
moving that along.
So the multimodal transload facility, it's a massive project in the amount of, you know, red tape or whatever you got to go through getting those grants. And not only that is you got Union Pacific, and that's equally as difficult. So we're trying to wade through all those issues. I know tonight the Planning and Zoning Commission has an item on that for the special use exemption permit for Capital and their oil offloading facility that will be right next door to our facility. I think ultimately we'll ask for the same thing for ours. We're working towards having plans ready to bid out by early January, with construction being complete on phase 1 in June to meet the requirements on the MoDOT Freight Enhancement Grant that the money has to be spent by mid-June. And then the EDA grant, that money would be plenty of time to have that done. So it's a little bit of jockeying things around to be able to utilize the money that we've gotten through the grant. So with grants are great and all that, but it does bring a lot of extra things you got to work on. But it's a very busy project. We're meeting at least weekly, sometimes even more than weekly, to make sure we accomplish all these tasks. So, but it is moving along, and it's still in about the same, as far as cost-wise, we're still about the same, about the 3.2 million. So, all right.
Great, thanks. All right, we'll go back up to item 3, business number 1, Basin 10 sanitary sewer. I think Mr. Seaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the County Public Works does have a storm sewer project planned for Westview Heights subdivision. So it's in the sort of the western end, and it's in essentially where we need to upgrade sanitary sewers as well. So again, that good relationship we were talking about, they allow us and Water District 1 to go in and replace infrastructure when they do these projects. So we would like to take advantage of that. We get economy of scale for restoration and traffic control and that sort of thing. And then we like it also because the customers get inconvenienced or bothered just once. You know, we can go in there and get everything fixed at the same time. So this looks like a $80,000 contract with Bartlett and West to do the design will be in some blocks that they are not, so we'll need some help from Bartlett and West to do this.
All right, so you'll be looking for action on this.
Yes.
So prior to that, any questions, comments? Recommended action?
I mean, I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second. There's some suggested wording in the memo, so we'll work off of that. Any other questions? Any other comments? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Item 2, sign code update. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a simple item. Some issues had been brought up earlier this year in a couple different meetings about maybe some potential changes to the sign code. I just want to take an opportunity this morning to see if there are maybe a couple specific things that want to be changed, or if this is if we should approach it a little more broadly. And we took some time. I know city attorney had some training for legal things that come up with signs, which are numerous. So anyway, I'd just like to open it up. Staff's looking for some direction on whether we're trying to draft something that's kind of short and sweet, or if we should start a process to make more changes.
Okay. All right, comments, questions? Councilman Spencer?
Yeah, I was envisioning just hopefully making it a simple addition as it relates to what I would call temporary signage, whether that is the feathered flags or banners, or even what we probably envision political signage, but promoting business. And that's what I was kind of looking at, that we could call that a temporary signage, that during business of or hours of operation for businesses, that they could use those signs and then take them down, you know, especially the feathered flags, take them down and then reinstall them the next day. And those would only be allowed to be utilized during hours of operation. Now, I don't know if that's feasible, but it just seems like other communities have either have an ed said policy, if you will, that we won't enforce that, you know, or something. But I mean, all over this country, feathered flags are used for business promotion. So, and it seems like it's an economical way for business owners to promote themselves. So that was the avenue I was just trying to take, to trying to help our businesses as much as possible. So,
I don't know, any comments or responses?
Not a response to Councilman Spencer, but from my perspective, from a legal perspective, looking at the new cases from the Supreme Court, I'm happy to announce that when we did some changes a few years ago in response to the Reed versus City of Gilbert case, we did it right. And so there's no structural changes that need to be made to our sign code. There's some cities out there scrambling right now to fix their sign code, but Jeff City's not one of them. So pat on the shoulder for some good work about 5 years ago. But you know, so a simplified approach is something that we can do because there's not underlying structural issues. So that's all I got.
So will that take action at some point, or that's something within
So
the current?
it is as simple as a code amendment project that can be as large or as small as the city council wants it to be.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just for,
Sure.
point of clarification, I think I've said numerous times businesses, but I've also gotten quite a few calls for our churches that utilize a lot of this signage for temporary signage as well, to promote programs for Sunday evenings or Wednesday night worship opportunities. So I don't want it just to be isolated for businesses, but also for places of worship as well. So churches. Thank you.
What would be a recommended course of action then to begin the process?
I'll defer. Go ahead.
I just want to sort of bring up some of the past history, and I was not involved with it directly, but I do know the last major prior to Mr. Molman's project 5 years ago, there was a committee formed by the council to actually take a look at a lot of the issues, actually the whole sign code. So if we go down the path of starting to make major changes, I think we might want to look at that model of going down, involving the public and business members and everything into that type of project, as opposed to just, you know, if we're just going to change one item, that might be done in here. I think it also have to go through planning and zoning, depending on how detailed it is. So it's going to be a process either way. Just want to throw that out.
Okay. Councilman Spencer?
Mr. Sanders, do you envision what I'm trying to accomplish, though, is as a major rewrite, if you will, or even incorporating a citizens group to try to accommodate that, or what would your recommendation
I'm going
be?
to defer to Ryan. If it's a matter of just maybe striking something through, not, well, I can't give legal advice, Ryan, about. He tells me that all the time.
So if it's a small change, no, I don't think there's any need to employ a citizens input group or anything like that. It's going to go through a lot of process just because of the nature of the regulation. It's going to go through the P&Z. There's going to be 2 public hearings on it. I think where we are having just a little bit of caution is something like the sign code. Once you open it up, people start saying, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And so I guess it's an anticipatory caution that we would like to know, is this what we're focused on, these few small changes? Or if we just start with these few small changes, we will also entertain new ideas, and then that could morph. And so we just want to be able to, I guess we reserve the right to re-recommend a larger process if the process turns out to be larger than what we originally anticipated to be. Sign code's just kind of one of those really complicated, messy things, and once you open it up, sometimes it's like, well, why not do a few more things as well? So just a little air of caution from staff sides. I think we've all had a little bit of experience in the planning and the legal world, at least, that these things change very, very quickly once you open them up. So we're just doing a little crystal ball reading here.
Did we have many complaints through the recent election on Tuesday or back in August in regard to signs? I mean, so basically people were complying with our guidelines, and
The last election, we had a couple minor complaints.
but nothing significant?
No.
Well, that's good.
So, yeah, it's in the last couple years that I've been here, it's usually less than a handful that have to do with oversized signs in residential districts and occasionally a sign in the right of way, which those are easy fixes for people. So,
Okay. Well, Councilman, how would you like to proceed?
I think if the staff is comfortable with what I would like to try to see changed, I will defer to your all's process and how we can get there. So
Start there and see how it goes.
So do you need formal requests from us, or just take from the discussion, you can begin the process?
I think the thing that's going to help us most are some informal direction of kind of pinpointing what are the things I would like to be say. So I think I generally understand the temporary sign and the feather flags, but maybe just some offline conversations with staff so we can get at least a good idea of where to start, and then we can build from there.
Okay. And obviously anybody listening or that have other ideas, now would be the time, so that if we do have to have a more detailed process, it'd be better to start it from this point versus midway, but, so Councilman, you can coordinate with staff to, does anyone else on the committee have interest in this issue or have suggestions? I don't really have any. Okay, so, thanks.
No problem.
Bruce?
We'll take off from there.
All right. Let's jump to item 3, CDBG policies and procedures. Ms. Cincy, early in the agenda this
Well,
month.
I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
I wonder why she was joining us. Thanks for joining us.
Ann Strotman, she's the doer of all things CDBG, so she will tell you more about our policies and procedures. We do update this on an annual basis. And then before, I'm going to kind of steal some of Ann's thunder, but our 5-year consolidated plan is getting ready to enter into its last year, which means over the course of 2023, we're going to begin the process of updating our consolidated plan for the next 5 years. And the reason why that's important is because that's the time where we dictate where the funds go for the next 5 years. So it's about 1.5 million broken down into about $300,000 increments annually. So this is the time to where if you want to shift funds or select where you're going to invest community development block grant funds, stay tuned. It's going to be a process throughout the course of 2023. Now I'll turn it over to Ann.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Again, Ann Strotman, Neighborhood Services Specialist. And again, I'm here to talk about the 2023 Policy and Procedures Manual for our Community Development Block Grant Program. And this is actually located in Chapter 5 of the City Code, and it does ask that it be adopted every year by council. And this is guidance for our CDBG program, and it provides a format to inform clients and guide staff on following proper administrative procedures. This manual will be effective January 1, 2023, and it will remain in effect until it is changed or replaced. And it does need to be approved by council via resolution. And so Rachel, like she said, just stole my thunder for the consolidated plan. So I will actually move on to another plan that we are going to be working on, which is the basically the RFP process to select a consultant to prepare the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, or AI. And I will just kind of give you a little bit of information on that, because that is also another process that will be starting here pretty soon, actually, and will go into next year. And so the AI will be used to evaluate, monitor, address, and resolve fair housing issues and to promote housing choice within the city. And the last AI was completed in 2018. And in accordance with HUD guidelines, entitlement communities are required to submit an AI every 5 years. And so as with the consolidated plan, there will be community engagement opportunities to garner input. And one of the tasks that is outlined is for the consultant to conduct a housing stakeholder interviews that will actually involve city council members, along with other major stakeholders in the community. And so, and as Rachel said, with the consolidated plan, it is a 5-year plan. It describes the community needs, and we also will be doing a 1-year action plan along with that. And the eligible activities are down payment assistance, exterior rehab of residential properties, removal of slum and blight, and public improvement projects. And so that is really all that I have, and I ask that to forward it to the City Council for approval or adoption. Any questions?
All right. Any questions? There is a request for action once we get through the. Seeing no questions, anybody feel comfortable making a
Make
motion?
to move this forward.
All right, we've got a motion to move it forward to council.
Second that.
Got a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. All right, we've already done item 4. Item 5, annexation. I believe you had some comments, Councilman Spencer?
Yeah, I think at our last meeting, we wanted to ask staff if they had any areas to look at for potential growth of the city of Jefferson. And I think, Matt, you'd sent an email and saying that there's a process, and obviously, but I guess my question is who's kind of the lead agency, if you will, within the city to kind of maybe inform this group of potential areas that, so that we can kind of get going on some.
Yeah, from my perspective, historically, it's been planning and law, but we're all involved to some extent. I mean, including fire, police, everybody. If we do a plan of intent, so Eric Barron was over there. Gotta take these off so I can see. But basically, talking to Eric, you know, anything obviously on the periphery, it's got to be certain contiguous and all that good stuff. But the 96 plan still has several areas that was discussed about annexing for various reasons. Some of them were, I think, population growth. Some of them were open space to allow for new growth. Some of them across the river, for example, was, as I recall, to kind of control what the look of that was as you came into the city, you know, kind of that pallet factory area over there. And so any of those are on the table, but I think last time was talking about setting up an annexation committee meeting, of which is the whole group, as I recall, Ryan. Yeah. And so that's kind of where that starts, I suppose, and somebody on the staff can give a presentation about the plan. It's a pretty dated plan, but it's still pretty, you know, much the same information. Some actually, one or two of the areas been annexed, Eric. Yeah, so you can kind of see versus 96, it's pretty dated, but like I said, it's pretty, you know, relevant, I feel like.
Well, and I guess that would be a great course to take, other than maybe presenting that first to this committee, and then that way we could kind of hash it out and have some discussion. But there were some areas that I was had questions on see if maybe put on your all's radar screen for potential growth, and like within the first ward, Shot Road, Julie Drive, LePage Road, that area. Third ward would be like Highway 179, Briar Village, Benita Paseo, Catalina, Wellington, Rainbow Hills, Hunter's Run, Pioneer Trail out in that area. Fourth ward we've already talked about numerous times in here is the Wildwood Extension. There's pocket area of South Country Club and New Bedford Court that I think has kind of like a little square area that is all surrounded by city limits, so I really think that would be a great area for voluntary annexation. And then the fifth ward would be Greenberry to Wardsville, Legacy Lane and Heron and Wilmore Drive area. Again, that's kind of an area that is a little bit of confusion, and maybe it's not so much anymore, maybe with some updated information, but with some response times for fire response, though. So I just wanted to bring those on to kind of convey maybe some potential areas, and if that could be part of your all's presentation, or at least to look at and give your all's assessment of what that would
Yeah,
look like.
and we could certainly do it, but I mean, I think Sonny's group would be the lead on it, and then, or Brian, I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, but.
The most important thing that you have to do to kind of determine who's going to be in charge is determine what your goals are. This is a top-down problem where you need to figure out what your goals are, and then staff can figure out what's the appropriate staff to help fulfill those goals. Because if you're annexing, you know, something like Wildwood area, the biggest problem out there is infrastructure. And I would think that Public Works would have a outsized role in that type of annexation procedure. If you're annexing existing land that's already built and populated, and maybe there's some pockets of growth available, that's probably a planning intensive type of project with a lot of support from law and administration and police and fire. and also finance. So it's you know it's less about what's built because it's already built out. It's more about how do you wrangle the services that would need to be provided to newly annexed land and do it in a procedure that is fair and competent. And so that's I see that as the first step is what are the goals and what are the goals attached to each of these areas. And once that's figured out, then you can kind of figure out the appropriate approach.
And I guess with what I've laid out here, that goal would just say basically clean up the city map, make it more contiguous, make it more, as a visual effect of how the city limits lay and look on a map. So as far as the Wildwood extension, obviously that is something for future growth within the city or for the city. And so I understand, that there might be some different targets for depending on the goals and objectives of an annexation plan. So, but I guess what I'm asking is that, how can we officially start getting this process rolling, start having some discussions and really, engage the community and the people that it may affect and obviously the city services that it'll affect. So just looking for what the leap jump off point is here, so.
I think that is probably tied mostly to the fact that if you're annexing areas that have an established population, it's really a political question and it's a political problem because you need to convince those people that live just outside city limits that it is better, for their family and their future prospects to be in the city than just right outside of it. And so I think that is likely why the annexation committee exists in the form that it does, with the recognition that that is primarily a political problem that has to be solved. And so, I think that's kind of at least my perspective on why that is the preferable venue.
And I get that. I'm very well versed on the annexation process, very well. My frustration is that it just doesn't seem to ever get anywhere. So I guess I'm asking if this would be more of an annexation study of looking at potential areas. I think that's really the initial first step. I mean, I don't think we necessarily have to get, the full annexation committee together to just possibly talk about some potential areas. But maybe if that's what you all are comfortable with, that is fine. I just think that we just need to start having more of a robust discussion about this. We haven't annexed, we haven't grown since 1997. And if we want to see our community grow, I mean, that next benchmark, ever since I've lived here, we've always wanted to say that Jefferson City needs to hit that 50,000, population. And, we've already lost 2 years of the next census block. So if that's something that this and future councils really want to see addressed, then I think time is somewhat, critical here. So,
Mr. Sanders?
Thank you. Part of the previous comprehensive plan update in 1996 actually had a component that was completed a few years after that plan was completed, and that's what Mr. Marash was referring to, an annexation plan. So it sounds like you're requesting staff to do an annexation plan, update the previous one, because I think Matt is more or less correct in terms of a lot of the geography hasn't changed. The numbers, the finances, development in those areas may have changed, but I would throw that out. Now, that would require resources.
Does that mainly cover areas that are voluntary annexations, or it's broad voluntary and the approach of trying to convince?
Did they go into the voluntary version? I'm going to let Eric give a brief recommendation. Eric's gone through the process before. I
A
have
volunteer.
not, so
Well,
Mr. Barron?
I have the drawback of having been here long enough to see the cycle go through a couple times. The last annexation was in 2007. Capitol Hills, Route C area was annexed. That was a last voter-approved annexation. And the last failed one was in, I think it was 2012. It was an area out on the western side of the city to annex 2 hotels. Okay. Prior to that, yes, there was the 1996 annexation plan that was done kind of in conjunction with the 1996 comprehensive plan. It does have some relevance to it maybe in terms of just kind of laying out, areas that were being pointed at the time. But a lot has changed, particularly construction of Edgewood Drive and Highway 179, which didn't exist at the time. And there have been a lot of annexations in that area. I mean, the topic of annexation it can be a very complicated one. Typically, the way past city councils have proceeded with the topic is to call the annexation committee and for that committee to give staff some direction. What we've done in the past is actually lay out potential areas on the entire outskirts of the city and then let the city council point at an area to kind of be pursued. Now, that process, what I'm talking about, is really for a voter-approved annexation process. When it comes to the voluntary annexation process, typically that's initiated almost at the property owner level. There's certain the policy level. There's certain policies that the city has in place, particularly the sewer connection policy. That if you're going to connect to the city sewer service, you must annex or sign an agreement to annex, basically depending if you're contiguous or not. And so that policy basically forces undeveloped people who are going to develop property into the city boundaries. So in the past, there hasn't been a lot of attention to trying to annex those undeveloped tracts because it's assumed or required basically that they would annex into the city at the point of development. And so I hope that gives a little bit of guidance.
It does, Mr. Barron, and I appreciate that, but I guess with the voluntary annexation question, I'm fairly confident that a lot of the areas are not aware that they could voluntarily annex. So I guess that's why I thought, well, have we ever kind of invited those folks in? Have we made contacts out in those pockets that we feel that could be voluntarily annexed and say, hey, would you like to voluntarily annex into the city? I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with folks that, well, I wasn't even aware that we could have that as an option. So maybe that's another part of the process we need to make sure we can communicate to.
So there was one of those conducted shortly after the failed hotel vote. There was the neighborhood, the Meadows by the Club area. And we did do a voluntary annexation of that neighborhood. It is extremely rare to get an entire neighborhood to agree on something that controversial. And so in that case, all but I think it was 5 or 6 of the houses out there agreed to sign voluntary petitions. That leaves 5 or 6 donut holes, so to speak, kind of within the city boundary, and so it's not necessarily the cleanest. A voter-approved annexation has the benefit of it, getting entire neighborhoods, making it very clear where the boundaries are. I would say it's near impossible to annex and to get an entire neighborhood to agree on something like that, and so. So
one of the first things that I did when I got hired was take a look at our sewer annexation agreements. And basically, it's kind of what you were saying, is taking a look and said, is there anyone out there that should be annexed that just hasn't? Primarily under the sewer annexation agreements regime. And there's a provision in the city code that identifies a few subdivisions that are exempt from the sewer policy that basically says if you're going to hook up to sewer, when you become contiguous, you must annex. The city code calls out a few neighborhoods that don't have to comply with that. And the effect of that, it creates, the visual of Swiss cheese. And so a lot of the properties that could annex, if they were contiguous, or would be actually required to annex if they were contiguous, are blocked by these exempt subdivisions. And so that kind of ended the inquiry for me, is because, okay, we do have a smattering of property owners that have voluntarily said, if I become contiguous, I will annex. But they're blocked by these exempt subdivisions. And so that's something that the city council would have to take a look at, is whether or not it would have, it would want to remove that exemption from those subdivisions, or even if you could, I'm not sure if those exemptions are merely regulatory or if they're contractual. So I have gone through this exercise just in my office and really found a dead end because of these exempt subdivisions. That's at least on the west side. And that doesn't address the services issue that once you annex people in, you have to provide them services. And if you're doing solely residential annexations without corresponding commercial, then a lot of times the ledger board on that is upside down because it's expensive to provide services. So
We are surrounded
we've done a little bit of that in my office, that analysis, and that's at least what I found.
We are surrounded by fire protection districts, so we have to pay, what is it, up to 5 years of tax?
That sounds right.
And
I'd have
it's
to look at it.
proportioned, it's kind of prorated out over those 5 years, from what I remember.
Yeah.
Unless something has changed since I've been gone, but, okay. So I know that's another hurdle, if you will.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we got a lot of different roads to be able to get to our destination somewhat. It's just utilizing all the internal city resources to gather that information and data, I guess, so. Okay, thank you.
It sounds like from 4 different individuals, the recommendation was if we want to pursue this, that we ought to get the annexation committee together, which is the council as a whole, correct?
So who starts that process? Okay.
The Mayor Pro Tem is the chair of the annexation committee. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Did you see the grin he made?
Thank you for playing. Time frame. I know we have a lot on our agenda. Is this something you're looking at in a month, in a quarter? So we kind of.
So it still sounds like for this to be meaningful, we would need an update of the annexation study and incorporating what Councilman Spencer's proposed. Is that
What
correct? And to do that, we need resources to do it. So.
Well, go ahead, Mr. Barron.
Okay, so the last time there was actually a study in, I think it was 2001, where the city hired a consultant, and it was really in conjunction with an extremely large annexation proposal at the time, where the city had 3 different incredibly large annexations on the ballot at one time, one for the entire west side of the unincorporated area, one for kind of, I call it on the south side, the Wildwood area, I think it was actually included, and then the Algoa area. Of those 3, only one passed. And so, again, an incredibly large, political issue whenever the city is proposing to annex an area. And so that study exists out there too, where they kind of looked at some of those areas. Again, the annexation committee, I think, one of the first things, if the city council wanted to move in that direction, one of the first things that they do is start to look at those boundaries. Could also look at the policies that are in place, as Ryan kind of alluded to, to see if changes need to occur there. You know, the benefits of annexation versus, you know, the costs. You know, annexing residential areas is, you know, is generally not a cost. You know, it does not add to the city revenue. It's, you know, it typically, just kind of as a general statement, costs more to provide services to a residential house than they pay in taxes, for example. But things like that, it's a very, you know, very broad kind of collection of things to look at. If that adds anything.
Oh.
So, in terms of conducting an annexation study, there are some other ones that are still out there. It may still be relevant, and you know, we could certainly bring those forward and let you take a look at them to see if something new is required.
Mr. Marash?
Yeah, I think, just so everybody knows, that was Algoa that was successful. So that area was, and I can't remember the year either, but it seems more recent. But anyway, and then another thing we did, kind of an offshoot of annexation, it's been a few years, but we established one kind of line of demarcation, if you will, with St. Martin's, where we said, hey, we won't go beyond this boundary, you don't come beyond this boundary, and that was part of a kind of a sewer rate deal as well. And I don't remember when that was, but it seems fairly recent, but it could be 10 years by now. And then we tried that with Taos as well, and that kind of blew up on everybody. Taos got upset, and that's why when Eric showed that map, several of those properties annexed into Taos and on out Route J or whatever it is. So in reaction to that, they annexed into Taos real quickly. And so that kind of didn't go well. And we never got an agreement with them, and they ended up building their own sewer plant, and you know, that probably came with some issues for them later, but that's kind of what happened in that regard. So that was more recent as well, but it could be 10 years now. I just don't remember.
Well, it sounds like we keep circling back to we need to get the annexation committee together before we expend financial resources, and I understand expending staff resources translates into dollars, but it sounds like we need to get the committee together to see if there's an appetite to push forward with staff time and financial resources. Is there consensus on that?
Would you like a motion on that, or what? I just want to make sure there's no cloudiness on this issue.
I don't know the form of a motion. I mean, you've directed the chair of that committee to do that, so, I mean, unless legal counsel thinks we ought to have something documented in the minutes.
If the chair of the annexation committee wants direction from this committee to call it, that's up to you.
Yes, I would entertain a motion, sir.
I didn't make a motion that this body approves to make the recommendation of assembling the full annexation committee to discuss growth opportunities for the city of Jefferson.
Second.
With one request, would you put a time frame in there? First quarter of 2023, is that reasonable?
Absolutely, or I will defer to what?
Well, I'd like to have a time frame in there so
Okay.
everybody's.
Okay, then first quarter 2023 would be fine with me.
Did our secretary get that? All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Citizen opportunity, I don't see anybody. So we'll jump to item 5, reports neighborhood services grant updates. Ms. Senzi, and I think we had a document
Yes,
on our table.
I did not make the timeline to get it in the packet, so my apologies there. Okay. So what's been going on in grants? We'll kind of scroll through. The EDA grant, I gave a presentation about MSP last month, and it relatively remains unchanged. We continue to meet with the state and with our developer and other stakeholders and partners that are involved in the project. Again, still the concept is to try to get a programmatic agreement together by February of 23, and to be able to start work. Once we get that agreement in, we can get our notice to proceed from EDA and kind of get over that hump a little bit. The EDA CARES Act through the Economic Recovery Plan, this is something that's being handled through our Regional Planning Commission. They received CARES Act funding from EDA, and one of the things that we worked with the chamber, and then it was at the same time that the Jefferson City Regional Economic Partnership was formed, determined that there was going to be, in a nutshell, the FCC maps that show how built out as far as broadband goes with the city and Cole County don't really reflect accuracy, and it limits the amount of funding that broadband providers have access to in order to spend money in Jefferson City or Cole County. So one of the requests was to do a Cole County plan. So that's the RPC is working on that right now. They hired Finley Engineering to conduct a broadband plan. Recently, within the past 6 months or so, the state, the Department of Economic Development, has built out a broadband division, and they are engaged in a series of public engagements to develop a statewide broadband equity and development plan for the entire state. In doing so, once they submit the plan, the state will receive a minimum of $100 million. In addition, there's going to be $37.5 billion that gets allocated based on unserved and underserved locations. So that's why it's really important to get our plan in place, so it highlights those underserved and unserved. That way it can potentially funnel more dollars there.
Could I just raise a question?
Sure.
I thought I overheard, and I'm not sure which meeting it was, that the plan showed Cole County being 100% covered when we know that it's not. So
that's correct.
Is that what you're talking about with our plan? We need to have input that, hey, this is not
right.
realistic.
So anytime in the past, the only maps that we had available were those FCC maps, and so they would look at it and say, well, it's all built out. It's not eligible for funding. So then they move on somewhere else. But we know, we just anecdotally know that that's not accurate. There's areas that aren't serviced. There's areas that are severely underserviced. So getting updated maps and an updated plan will allow broadband providers, or even city or county municipal government, to have access to those funds in order to build out broadband. So that's the reason why we would want to do that, is so we're kind of getting our basket ready for when that funding pool opens. Otherwise, if we just use the old maps, we would not be included in that opportunity.
And that's another potential cooperation with Cole County and with our partners.
Yes,
there.
and the broadband plan that's currently underway, this is, we're going to be a little bit ahead of the state, and I think the state is going to probably utilize our plan once we get it completed, to incorporate it in theirs. At least they have a built-out section, and that is we utilize the Regional Planning Commission for that activity. So they're handling the contract. They're working with the engineers because they're looking at more of a regional approach that will include Cole County. That way we can make sure we're all connecting into each other. So we anticipate that plan originally was supposed to be done by the end of this year. Probably it's going to get pushed a little bit because a lot of other cities and areas are doing the same thing that we are. So there's a capacity issue. But the other thing I wanted to point out was at the last. So we did attend. Anne's still here. Anne and I went to Columbia a couple weeks ago to participate in the public engagement series that the state was providing. So the handout that they gave is attached at the end of the report, where it's really talking about connecting all Missourians. So there's a couple of things that we can do as a community, and one of them is just signing up as a participant, which allows your community on a local level. If you qualify, you can apply for funding to get $30 a month off of your internet costs, or $100 off of laptops, computers. Basically, they're trying to give everybody access to digital capability. So that's something that's very minimal that we just sign up to do, and that it opens up our area so we can do that. But then it's also just making sure that the council and our community is aware of the overall impact of what this is going to what this is going to do. Because I believe at the last meeting we talked about, or maybe the meeting before, we talked about the annoyance factor of the lines constantly being exposed and not, the contractors not taking good care, and mention of an ordinance being adopted. Just be cognizant of making sure that our ordinances don't impede on people being able to build out. Because really the more providers that you have in the community, that kind of drives costs down for your folks that live here. And it also is an incentive for anybody that, any industry that wants to come in because you're already built out. So that is, and I'll continue to update, this body as things start to connect and progress. But as far as the planning goes, that's we have a localized plan that will be done shortly, and then the state will have a plan that will probably be completed within a year. Sure. The next one, we talked a lot about our community development block grant. This is specifically our entitlement funds. We received about $300,000 a year, give or take a little bit. It's always based off of allocations. We do have our Adams Hickory Street Sidewalk project where we're contributing $313,000 of CDBG funds. That project is supposed to start really soon. We had some delays with the contractor, so we're trying to get them going. Ann mentioned the analysis of impediments on fair housing choice. That plan is required to be updated every 5 years. We have our bid packet, our RFP upstairs with purchasing, so we anticipate that being opened shortly. We also recently received the award for the 2023 allocation, which is $290,586. We'll put that on the next council agenda for a grant acceptance.
So they look like they've started work.
Oh, good.
Dunklin and
Yay.
and
We-
Adams. Yes,
Yeah.
the first block.
Tia's scared.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yes, they did start that work on Monday.
Excellent. I will update the next report to reflect that. CDBG disaster recovery funds. Really, we're in a holding pattern until we hear back from MHDC about if any of our 3 proposed developments received the low-income housing tax credits. They did have their public hearing on Monday. We had some local opposition speak out against Eastland Hills and Oakleaf, none for Stronghold. And I don't believe I heard any, we were at council, but I don't believe any spoke out against Simonson as either. Simonson pursued the low-income housing tax credits without utilizing the disaster recovery funds. So we're still looking at them. Overall, 4 projects in Jefferson City pursuing the tax credits. We should know, I believe the commission gets together late November, early December, but we should know in December if any of our projects were funded. And then that will tell us how much DR recovery funds we have left and kind of give us some options of what we can do starting in 2023. Historic Preservation Fund. We have completed the structural assessment for East Capitol Avenue. So that project has been completed and closed out. The next one is that we're going to talk about is the Paul Bruin Revitalization Grant. That is the historic preservation grant that we received directly through the National Park Service. The applicants that were funded recently participated in a grant administration workshop where staff we sit down with the recipients and we walk them through their grant from start to finish. Because as Eric Landwehr mentioned that there's a lot of hoops to jump through with federal grants, and we just want to make sure that we're upfront with those from the beginning. So we are currently, we have sent their environmental reviews to National Park Service for review. And then they're going to start, they have to sign an award and they have to sign a conservation easement, basically stating that their property will be preserved to the Secretary of Interior standards for the next 10 years. And so we have to go out and do kind of a design review assessment on defining what architectural features are significant there. They'll have to undergo a design review process, which can be shocking to some people, but it's basically making sure that everything that they're going to do on their historic building does not diminish the historic value. So the Historic Preservation Commission is going to work heavily with those applicants before they go to National Park Service. The time it takes to go back and forth is what kind of stretches these out. So the more we can limit the back and forth with NPS is what the goal is that we're trying to accomplish. Jumping over to state community development block grant CARES Act funding, council on Monday accepted the Compass Health Planning. It's a $114,000 grant project. $14,000 is for admin for city staff, and then $100,000 is going to be a market analysis to look at environmental design for what Compass Health. Compass Health is interested in kind of housing environment in Jefferson City, but they want to get their plans to get planning documents together before they can provide that service. So this is kind of step one of that. We also continue to work with transformational housing. They are currently working with the State Historic Preservation Office on their design review element. So that's where they are. They want to replace windows, so they're probably going to go into an MOA process there, which should just take a little bit more time, but it'll be good at the end. We have received notification that we're going to be receiving 2 more Historic Preservation Fund grants, and one of them is for design guidelines, and basically of what we already have, but making them a little bit more readable for the general public. Also, instead of the West Main Phase 2 architectural survey, we're going to redo the Phase 2 that did not work out with the consultant during the last year. So we're going to have to kind of double back and recapture, but that was also funded. Grant applications that we're currently working on is the Community Revitalization Grant Program. This is what I had mentioned last Public Works and Planning meeting regarding demolishing selected structures within the Missouri State Penitentiary, but also being able to put rehab of some of the historic structures that are in the core. It won't do all of it, but it'll kind of help a little bit as far as buttoning those buildings up. That's about $3.75 million is going to be our request. We're also pursuing the local tourism asset development grant to assist with the hotel gap financing, and that's $2 or $2.5 million. I lost my recollection. I think it's $2.5 million to help them. Both grants require a 50-50 match, but we can utilize all the funds that we're already putting into the site to leverage that match fund, so we don't anticipate needing additional funds there. And that is what we've been working on for the past month. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that great summary. Thanks for all your work. Questions, comments? All right, you did a great job. So thanks. And then we also had the active transportation. I think Ms. Williams, you're gonna bring us up to date on that.
Yes, so there should be something in your packets. I wanted to touch on 2 different projects we have going on. Is that not working? Oh, I thought it was just me. So I did want to touch on two separate projects. So currently I'm functioning as a planner, and then also about half my time for the next few months as the interim transit grant administrator, since we have a vacancy in transit. So I wanted to just touch on the proposed fare increase public meetings that we're having. So there's a survey that's open until December 9th, and we have 2 public meetings. We held one last night. Thank you to those 3 council members who showed up for that. And then we have another one next week, November 17th from 9 to 11 in the same room, in the Boone Bancroft room. So just wanted to touch on that. We'll be giving that survey feedback to council in January is what our timeline is right now. Any questions about that process? Okay. So our active transportation plan, We're entering into our second round of public engagement for that. So just a reminder, it's a regional plan through Campo, but we're integrating our capital area pedestrian and bicycle plan that was written in 2016 with the city's sidewalk plan, Jeff City's Greenway plan, and then also Holt Summit also had a transportation, a bike ped plan that we're integrating. So we had over 763 surveys received as part of that first round of surveying. We're actually going to keep that survey open through the second round because we're doing some more public engagement and outreach. The second round will include another steering committee meeting where we'll be looking at those network proposals. So where should we be focusing on in terms of connectivity for greenways, sidewalks, bike routes? That information will be available to the steering committee and then also available for the public at a public meeting. That will be December 1st, 4:30 to 6 here in the council chambers on December 1st, if I already said that. So we're having a community bike ride / community walk that will leave from that public meeting and go to the mayor's Christmas tree lighting. We're hoping that might bring a few more people into our public meeting and encourage them to be active, go to the Christmas tree lighting. We really hope that the weather cooperates with us. And then we're also going to be at Living Windows the next evening, December 2nd. We'll have a booth outside Central Bank. Thank you to Central Bank for giving us some space for that. We're always looking for volunteers if anyone wants to help volunteer with any of our engagement. During this process, during this 2-day process, we'll also be doing walk audits. So we'll have 3 different opportunities, and I think I've sent out an email to all of the council members about this, but I encourage council members and staff to attend one of these. They're really helpful to walk around with professionals in the field and see, why things are designed the way they are, what kind of access needs exist in the community. It's a great way to interact with members of the public too that might attend. So it's just a good informative training if you haven't attended one of those before. So that flyer for that, all of that information I just went over is in your packet. So I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you for the update. I had a chance to attend last night. I know the media is on with us. Hopefully they can continue to help us encourage people to either attend the public hearing next week on transit or to complete the survey so we can get as much input into that discussion as possible. But I appreciated the work that went into it for minimal turnout there, but as you indicated last night, we have been receiving the surveys, which is equally as important.
I would say we had, I think the last time I checked, about 50 digital surveys, and then I think Glenna told me that they have about 20 or so more down at Transit that paper surveys that people have filled out.
Good. All right. Any questions, comments on that? As far as new business, I just had a couple, just reminding everybody we've got the parking study next Monday night. You should have got a nice packet a day or two ago of some light reading for the weekends, in between college football games or whatever. There's a lot to do there, but I would encourage you to try to go through as much of that as possible so we're kind of ready to jump in. The consultants will be with us Monday night.
Yeah.
So
yes, they'll be here. And I try to give a Cliff Notes version, if you will, of each aspect of it. So all that's in a packet downloaded on your iPad.
So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's going to be, there's a lot of pieces, not only to that, but we've got continuing the other piece of parking that we've been dealing with, the meters. I mean, obviously the financial side of both what it's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it. So I would encourage you to look through that packet. It's fairly detailed and typical consultant. A lot of pages, but also a lot of pictures, so you can go through it. It kind of verbally and gives you a picture of what they're talking about. And then just a reminder, we've got a lot on our docket, so this committee continues to push a lot of projects forward. Anything else, new business, come before the committee? All right.
To adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Thank you very much.